So it's my favorite season of the year, awards. And as per usual, I have watched all 10 Best Picture nominees so that I could have both the most educated and the most correct opinion of anyone that I know. And I thought it would be fun to do a little rapid fire review ranking of the 10 Best Picture nominees because I do have opinions, and let's just say some of these movies are better than others. Coming in at number 10, this year's worst Best Picture nominee is F1. I did not like this movie. I can applaud the technical achievements and I can say that it gave me a greater appreciation for all of the math and science and physics that goes into the world of this pretty, high speed racing F1 stuff. But that's about it. Going in, I knew it would be a bit of an advertising spree. I mean, the movie itself, it's F1 the movie, and the title is stylized as the logo from the F1 Racing League. So it was always pretty, copacetic with the branding. But the advertising on screen was distracting and actively comical at times. In Las Vegas, you see the Wynn Hotel and all of these luxury buildings and also the Sphere, and it's like just a huge tourist ad for the city. And not to mention the pretty uncomfy sports washing that happens with the entirety of the third act taking place in Abu Dhabi. I think it's definitely a little overly capitalistic in a way that rubbed me the wrong way. It makes sense that this was made by the same team that did Top Gun Maverick, a movie I also didn't like, but a movie that at least had Tom Cruise and like a moving tribute to Val Kilmer. This had nothing of emotional substance, and while Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise need similar levels of celebrity PR rehab for various reasons, Brad Pitt is not Tom Cruise, and he can't exactly surmount his controversies with incredible stunt work or charisma in the way that Tom Cruise can. And also, this movie doesn't ask him to do the same kind of stunt work, so it's a bit less impressive overall. In line with that sort of Top Gun Maverick overlap, I found this movie to be really generic and dated. Everything from a Chuck Norris joke to a bizarre and unnecessary third act twist villain. It just felt like a movie that would have been made in the 90s. When this movie first came out last year, I saw a lot of comments and sentiments online saying, if an actress in her 60s decided she wanted to lead a big budget IP movie and it stars her as an aging athlete, star, person, whatever, who comes back to their prime, she would be laughed out of Hollywood. But Brad Pitt did that. It's an annoyance and a sentiment that I share that really bothered me throughout the movie, especially because Brad Pitt's character barely exists, and I have no reason to care about him other than the fact that he looks good for his age. He passes the torch in the movie to a younger driver played by Damson Idris, but it is very clearly the Brad Pitt show throughout, and I just didn't care for it. The most frustrating part of this movie for me, aside from the Brad Pitt of it all, is that it's almost like Joseph Kosinski didn't trust his own filmmaking or his own filmmaking team. Things are painfully overexplained, and during what should be really thrilling race scenes, we have a consistent commentary team that makes it feel like you're just watching the sport rather than in the driver's seat with our protagonists. And it really creates a distance that it's hard to get past. And with that, the writing feels kind of like Netflixy in the way that people behind the camera, it's almost like they've been told that they need to have everything explained so that people who aren't paying full attention can still follow along. In terms of its other nominations at the Oscars, I wouldn't be mad if F1 won editing. I think the editing team did a really good job. But sound should absolutely go to Surat, and I think visual effects should probably go to Avatar. F1 is basically bottom of the barrel, and many of this year's Best Picture nominees are, to me, solid, good, but not amazing. I was thoroughly whelmed by a lot of movies in 2025, so I have an overall positive take on every other movie I'm including and mentioning. It's just that most of them didn't really blow me away. But every other nominee is definitely a step up from F1. With that, my ninth Best Picture nominee is going to be Marty Supreme. I already have a full review for this movie uploaded, so you can watch that for, further opinions. But this is a movie that ultimately I've felt a lot less excited about the more distance I've had from my viewing experience. The filmmaking, pretty immaculate. Josh Safdie definitely knows what he's doing in terms of constructing this kind of seedy, predominantly New York world. And I do think the casting of this movie is a great strength, though the recent revelations and increased attention to the Safdie method of casting does make me feel a little suspect and a little uncomfy. And as time has gone on, I've gotten more annoyed with Marty's character. Not in the sense that, I know he's supposed to be annoying, but in that I don't find him compelling or narratively fulfilling as a protagonist. The final scene being him essentially returning to his true love and discovering the wonders of fatherhood is basically kind of bullshit given the movie that you had just watched for the preceding 2 hours. I literally rolled my eyes in the theater, and I still think it's a pretty weird cop-out ending. And it makes a lot of the plot elements that preceded it feel kind of inconsequential, and it makes the movie into more of a shrug as a result. On to number 8, I think the next best picture nominee is Sentimental Value. On paper, for me, this movie has everything. Daddy issues, complex but deeply emotional sibling dynamic, Elle Fanning. But when I saw it in theaters, I felt this kind of profound distance with the film, and that made it a bit of a disappointment. In hindsight, I maybe shouldn't have watched The Worst Person in the World the literal night before I saw it, because I do think that's a better movie and a better Renata Reinsve performance. So a part of me does think I might appreciate Sentimental Value more on a rewatch with kind of less of an imposing better movie in my mind, but it was a good, not great film on the whole. The primary aspect of the film that made me kind of waffle on putting it this low is Inga Ibsdottir Lilius's supporting performance. I think hers was one of the best of the year, and certainly probably the best of the nominated actresses for Best Supporting Actress. I am a huge Elle Fanning fan, and I always love her work, but she didn't stand out to me as much, so I wish maybe her character got a little more bulk or had a few more interactions with the other female characters on screen. Stellan Skarsgård does really great work in what's very interesting metatextual work. And I also know that he came to this role after suffering a stroke and having to really readjust his acting process. And you can't tell here, he does really a great job and a great performance. And since supporting actor seems like such a toss-up at this point, I wouldn't be mad if he walked away with the Oscar. On the whole, though, I found this movie very emotionally detached, almost lacking in sentimental value, and it's supposed to have some real emotionally revelatory moments. And while I think parts of it are very well done, well written, and well directed, that's just a gap that sentimental value couldn't cross for me. As for our 7th best picture nominee, I would say that would have to be Begonia. It is clearly not the strongest or the best Yorgos Lanthimos Emma Stone collaboration that we've seen this decade even, but it was a really great time as a fun puzzle and a total showcase for Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons. I have been a Jesse Plemons truther since Game Night, and this was such a logical and perfect progression from that role. I do think he was moderately robbed of a Best Actor nomination, but I can't really protest when the kind of surprise nomination ended up going to Ethan Hawke for Blue Moon, which I think should have been in Best Picture contention. But back to the point, Jesse Plemons is hilarious and terrifying and so totally gripping as this conspiracy theorist who might have a little more sense than we realize. No one can play unsettling like him, save for maybe Michael Shannon, but he was so good in this movie, and the back and forths between Jesse Plemons and Emma Stone are some of the best work that I saw on screen last year. I also think the work of Aidan Delbus, an autistic actor playing the autistic and easily manipulated cousin of Jesse Plemons' character, has been really underappreciated this season as well. Begonia is a worse movie if it doesn't have that sympathetic and emotional core character along for the ride, and his performance is really heartbreaking and gives the movie higher stakes than it would have otherwise, and I think he did a really great job. With that said, the screenplay does juggle a little too much and ends up leaving things too vague. Regardless of that sort of initial central mystery of is Emma Stone's CEO an alien, I don't think that Begonia delves deep enough into the fact that her character is a big pharma CEO and what she's actually done or caused or can reasonably be seen as guilty of in terms of what Jesse Plemons' character is accusing her of. It ends up feeling like she's kind of like a lightning rod for all sorts of social and kind of global issues without that really making an impact narratively. And so while I have these issues with the screenplay, the performances have really stuck with me, and I use the Emma Stone yay all the time when communicating now, and it is maybe becoming a problem. So that's a win for the movie. Rounding out the bottom half of my ranking is Train Dreams at number 6. Parts of this movie are beautiful and moving, and I found the last scene specifically to be really breathtaking and powerful as a moment of cathartic storytelling. The screenplay is a little bit episodic in nature, which means that some scenes end up, kind of better and more impactful than others. But several of those stronger scenes did get me to tear up, which is more than a lot of the other Best Picture nominees did. Major spoilers, so feel free to skip forward like 30 or 45 seconds. But the dead wife of it all throughout Train Dreams is a little bit exhausting. There are so many memes and bits online about, dead wife characters because so many movies have them and so many movies employ the same tropes to kind of express grief and sorrow over the loss of the dead wife. And Train Dreams is no exception. Joel Edgerton does some amazing work, and the gorgeous cinematography helps to really ground him in his strange isolation and this distance from the world he has while existing so thoroughly in nature. But then, like a wispy voiceover from Felicity Jones, the deadest wife to ever dead wife, will come in and kind of just like take you out of it in an otherwise like really beautiful movie. I mentioned before that I think I might like Sentimental Value more on rewatch, and in a weird way, I'm very confident that I would like Train Dreams more on a rewatch. It's an evergreen kind of movie, and it feels like a real kind of like quintessential Best Picture nominee, and I really liked it, aside from, I do think that the rest of the movies nominated represent a step up in some capacity, either because they had more complete vision or they executed it a little bit better. It's still kind of a strange year for movies overall for me, in that even the ones I'm about to applaud and that I enjoyed, I wasn't totally like head over heels for. While I do definitely have a favorite of these 10 Best Picture nominees, I think maybe as a whole the crop doesn't speak to me or doesn't feel as strong to me. With that in mind, my 5th favorite nominee is The Secret Agent. This movie felt good, not great for me until its final scene, and so it joins Jafar Panahi's It Was Just an Accident in delivering some of the best final 15 to 20 minutes of movie from last year. Just phenomenal work. Wagner Moura puts in really great work into this very long film, and he helps to ground it even as it weaves into a couple different genres and subplots and, various heightened aspects. The Secret Agent expands on this trend that's long been present but is having like a really great moment in sort of Southern Cone South American filmmaking, where filmmakers who grew up during or kind of immediately after these oppressive, repressive regimes are grappling with kind of cultural memory and cultural history, as well as the memories and histories that have been kind of forcibly disappeared from these nations. In college, I had this really great class on memory studies across Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. And it's fascinating to see how that academic lane has been mirrored so much and so effectively in the filmmaking from these countries, with other films like last year's, I'm Still Here and Argentina 1985, and kind of a lot of the work of Pablo Larraín, who's one of my favorites. It's a really rich theme to mine, and The Secret Agent layers it with a lot of other intrigue. There's a lot of overlapping plot and themes and motifs in this movie, and on paper they all work super well, but I do take some issue with the pacing and the means in which these puzzle pieces are put together. I had a similar problem with another film that the director did called Bacurau, but at the end of the day, art is subjective, and I can subjectively say that something about his narrative style and his filmmaking doesn't fully click with me, but I can appreciate the filmmaking on the whole. And I do love any movie that spends so much of its runtime in a vintage movie theater, and I was a sucker for all the split diopter shots. Coming in at number 4 is Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I am a longtime fan of Guillermo's more outwardly gothic efforts. Like, I'm the kind of person who puts Crimson Peak among his best. So this movie was a real feast for me, even as I had some issues with the pacing and sort of where focus was placed during parts. Frankenstein was a, fairly formative novel for me as a teenager, so I was really looking forward to this adaptation. It's definitely a good one, if not entirely faithful, despite what some people are claiming. I'm just happy Guillermo spent enough time on the monster with the blind old man in the house. That's all I needed. Ultimately, I think things wrap up maybe a bit too neatly for this story, and things are kind of spelled out in a way that isn't super helpful. There's an, at this point, fairly infamous line where Victor Frankenstein's brother proclaims, "You're the monster," to Victor, which I think the sort of chase that the monster goes on to get Victor is a little bit shortened and simplified in the movie, and ultimately I think the resolution kind of comes on a little too quickly and simply. But even with these issues, Jacob Elordi's performance as the creature really carried things for me. I began to really respect Jacob Elordi as an actor with his work in Priscilla, because I think that was a difficult role to tackle in several different ways, and he just completely blew me away with his work on Frankenstein, especially because he had very minimal prep time, because he came in to replace Andrew Garfield after SAG strike, WGA strike, scheduling issues. So he had such little time to build this creature character. Every single thing about the monster, from his performance to especially the hair and makeup, were just astounding and also incredibly moving to me. And it has helped this movie to really stick with me months after I saw it. Now, for my second and third placements, I really went back and forth about which movie to place where. I think they're both immaculately made and so well done. I think they are very different movies and accomplish very different feats. So it is a little bit of an apples and oranges situation, but I'm confident in my ranking at this point. So with that disclaimer, I'm saying that the third best Best Picture nominee is the Oscars record breaker, Sinners. Now, when I first saw this film almost a full year ago, there was all the hype in the world from critics and film fans, and I was so happy to be able to partake in that hype as well. But I didn't think it fully lived up to expectations at the time. And, it's still an amazing movie. It's just not absolute perfection. I do think Ryan Coogler is one of the most talented, intelligent, and consistent American directors we have today. And while I don't think this is his best movie, I do think it's his most technically ambitious, and he's obviously able to execute it very well. For instance, that entire I Lied to You sequence that functions as a tour through Black music history is utter perfection. And it was so thrilling to sit in an IMAX 70 millimeter screening and watch that scene and know that it was something that was going to be in the history books or at least film textbooks. And the Best Picture nomination is earned through that scene alone. I also really loved the emphasis on practical effects. On YouTube, there's actually a lot of really cool and in-depth behind-the-scenes featurettes on sort of the making of everything from the bloody prosthetics to like brand new contact lens designs made just for the movie. And it shows you just how much of an endeavor this movie was. Ryan Coogler used all of the tools he's gathered as a young, hungry, prominent filmmaker, and he employed so many people who were able to match his level of both talent and passion. And despite that obvious technical prowess, I do actually have quite a few issues with the Sinners screenplay, which is controversial, I know, since it is probably one of the favorites to go away with the Best Original Screenplay Oscar. But as someone who is a really big fan of genre movies, wrote a whole college thesis on how the horror genre can comment on or subvert social issues, I found the metaphors and the themes surrounding vampirism to be a little bit lacking. Sinners turns into kind of like an action horror by the end, and I feel it leaves a lot on the table. From the vampire hive mind thing to the relevance of the Native American vampire hunters to the concept of freedom that vampirism offers. It's only because the rest of the movie is so smart in its storytelling and its specific historical placement that these things really stick out and kind of bother me. And that sort of narrative precision has also made me really wrestle with Sinner's female characters and kind of struggle with their depictions since I've seen it. This is a surprisingly sexy and sexual movie, which I'm all for in our like increasingly puritanical times. But several of the women in the film come off as sort of like sexual caricatures of themselves in a way that made me a little uncomfy as a woman watching. So much of this movie involves sort of the concept of sin. You know, is Sammy sinning by singing the music he wants to sing? Are Smoke and Stack irredeemable criminals who are making things worse by bringing their business back to their community? You know, so on and so forth. But the women like Mary and Pearline's sins are tied basically entirely to their sexuality. Contrast those two with the angelic, sacrificial Annie, and we get like a pretty pronounced Madonna and horror dynamic that I don't think Ryan Coogler really addresses or maybe even realizes that he produced. It doesn't tank the movie for me, but for a film that pays so much attention to its cultural and societal dynamics and sort of, you know, the layers of oppression and repression that occur in this time period and in this location, it makes me feel a little disappointed and it leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth that the female characters weren't given the same level of consideration. So that's kind of the main drawback for Sinners for me. So in second place is Hamnet. Chloe Zhao is no stranger to making emotionally devastating movies, but I will say I went into this movie hoping to sob, and I only cried. Hamnet really captures and transports you to this strange world and this strange era that is just a little bit different from what we might recognize today. And it does so alongside a wonderfully strange witchy character that is Agnes, played by Jessie Buckley. And I think this movie kind of has a really hard line to walk because, you know, everyone knows Shakespeare, and I would like to think that a significant portion of the people going to see this in a theater are aware of the historical fact that Shakespeare's son died and ultimately spurred him to write Hamlet. But Chloe Zhao really makes like a mystical, mythological film out of this base story. That's also due in part to Maggie O'Farrell, who co-wrote the screenplay with Chloe Zhao while also being the one who wrote the novel that the movie is based on. And so that contributes to this sort of sense of otherworldliness that Zhao likes to cultivate with her movies. Adding to that, I think it's a very tricky art to be able to wring deep and sometimes painful emotions out of a story where you kind of already know the ending to it. And in that sense, I think that the scene where young Hamnet kind of realizes that he's dying and that he's going to the great beyond in some capacity was just utterly heartbreaking, breathtaking, and it was one of the most deeply sad and emotional scenes in a film from last year, and that has stuck with me in a really profound way. As for the performances, Jessie Buckley is obviously amazing. I don't think she's capable of turning in a bad performance. And, you know, I'll applaud her winning an Oscar on the night, even if I was a little bit more affected by Rose Byrne's work in If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. Her character does strangely kind of get a little lost in the latter half of the movie, which I think is to its detriment because Jessie Buckley's work is just really great, and I think the character is really interesting and really meaty, and I would have liked to see more of her on screen. Paul Mescal is also amazing, and I do know that he's capable of a bad performance because I have seen Foe, but this movie made me forget about that. And even if the narrative circumstances that bring him to recite some Shakespeare as Shakespeare are a little bit forced, he can really act the hell out of a Shakespearean monologue, and I'm glad we got to see it. And I do think he was a little bit robbed of a nomination himself. My main issue is with the Shakespeare of it all, as the movie kind of pivots to focus more on the bard and his struggles to write Hamlet, and it splits up William and Agnes for a notable amount of time, and that split up causes a bit of a disruption in the narrative momentum and kind of emotionality for me. And even though the film ends in a beautiful way, that comes after kind of a weird gulf narratively. But I still cried, so eh. And with that, there is only one Best Picture nominee remaining. So my favorite film and my favorite Best Picture nominee is One Battle After Another. I already have a review of this uploaded, so you can hear me kind of wax poetic about all the things I love about it more in depth there. But this movie has stuck with me for all the right reasons. Top to bottom, Sean Penn is an amazing movie villain as Lockjaw. Benicio del Toro is instantly iconic as Sensei, and I think he's maybe my favorite movie character of the past year. Tiana Taylor carves out the really fascinating and complex female figure. Chase Infinity is an immediate star, and Leo is hilarious. After seeing this on a normal movie theater screen, I went to go see it in 70mm IMAX, and that car chase in the hills made me levitate out of my seat. One Battle After Another and Sinners have some overlap for me in the sense that the people behind the camera were operating at the top of their game, but Paul Thomas Anderson's movie is able to put it all together a little bit more successfully for me. It's a film that's emblematic of where we are in America right now, and I think it comments on and satirizes so much of what's wrong with this country while also being incredibly entertaining. It's my favorite movie of 2025 and definitely my favorite Best Picture nominee by a pretty wide margin. There are many films that I would have loved to see nominated for Best Picture, from It Was Just an Accident to Blue Moon to The Testament of Anne Lee, though those first two at least did get nominations somewhere. Robberies happen every year. What can you do except hope Amanda Seyfried gets nominated next time? Ultimately, I'm excited for the Oscars, and I hope we get some fun surprises on the night.